This day will mark the beginning of months. This day is a day of new beginnings. So begins our reading from Exodus for this evening, and the word beginning stuck with me as I read the scriptures for today, and I wasn't sure why. I began to ponder why this was a beginning. You see, I think of Passover as an ending, not a beginning. I've seen the movie. It was one of my favorites. And it's clearly the end of the story. It's a 3-hour movie, if you've ever seen the Ten Commandments, and it's kind of at the end of it. You see, it's the end of God's acts in the Exodus, because shortly after the Passover, they're being freed. But then I began to realize that sometimes what we see as the end, God can transform into something new. New beginnings. I like new beginnings. New beginnings can be refreshing. As a former high school teacher and an adjunct college professor, there is no better feeling than an empty grade book. Spring. Spring at my house across from City Park is a beautiful place. It's a new beginning that's sorely needed after a dead, long winter. Things come back to life. Do you remember the birth of your child? A new beginning that somehow, magically, I never quite understood how this happens for women, but it does. Magically, after that birth, that new beginning somehow makes all the pain that came before it worth the while. There's a reason why women have babies and men do not. All of that got me thinking. Is it possible that God could be doing a new thing in our day as well? What has this time taught you about life? What are the things right now that you miss the most? They're probably the things you look forward to doing again, aren't they? I had church council this past Tuesday night, and it felt good. Now, I need to be honest, it wasn't the church council part, the meeting, that made me feel good. It wasn't that I enjoyed. It was the laughter. It was the smiles. It was the silly teasing and the stupid stuff we do as a church council every single month. In short, I missed the relationships. I missed those faces. It's the Skype video chats that we've been having with our kids and our grandkids these past 3 or 4 weeks. Seeing all of my grandkids feeling like there's some sort of togetherness in the midst of what is in reality isolation. I've turned off my TV a lot more recently. I've been escaping in a book, which is really pretty unusual for me. I'm not a big reader. I found myself being more present to the sight and sounds around me as I enjoy rocking in my front porch or going for a walk in an almost deserted city park. I've posted stupid, silly videos on Facebook because I find if I don't find a way to laugh, I'll just end up depressed and anxious. I truly believe that laughter and silliness is the best medicine. One of my favorite pictures of Jesus is the one of him laughing, and perhaps you've seen this artist's rendition. It's not Jesus in Gethsemane. It's not Jesus on the cross. It's not Jesus in front of an empty tomb. Those are all lovely, don't get me wrong. They're the bedrock of our faith. But my favorite is the more modern rendition of Jesus laughing. But when you see it, you realize it's not a smirk. It's not a smile. It is a full-on, head thrown back, ear-to-ear smiling belly laugh. That's the Jesus that I like to picture. Now, I need to be clear. I'm not saying that God is in control of this present situation as a way to teach us or to punish us. I've seen some really well-intentioned pastors and people post things on social media, and it makes me super uncomfortable. But that being said, I do think there can be some lessons that are learned, blessings to be had, and yes, changes to be made. In some way, I think the moment we're living in may, in fact, be a new beginning, if we allow it. But for that to happen, we need to listen. And I pray this is the case. I pray that our post-corona world is a kinder place. It says, don't divide us, but rather help us to see the gifts of mutual respect and understanding that we can gather from each other. I pray the post-corona world realizes that people matter more than prosperity and possessions. I pray the post-corona world teaches us and our leaders to place more value on integrity and honor than on ego, greed, and self-service. I pray the post-corona world finally understand where true values come from, and that's from being, not from doing. Our lives will ultimately be measured, I believe, by who we are, not by what we do. I believe we are living in life-changing moments. And life-changing moments do just that. They change our lives, but only if we let them. As I thought about what to say tonight, my father came into my mind as an example. My dad was a traditional Southern redneck good old boy. He loved North Carolina barbecue, the good kind from the eastern part of the state with vinegar, not that terrible kind with the barbecue. That's for pagans. He loved baseball. He loved country music. But when my father was 32 years old, the year I was born, he had his first heart attack, and he was never the same again. He lived the rest of his life through a series of nothing but heart attacks, heart medicines, heart procedures, and surgeries. Doctor's visits, hospitalizations, being told he was dying and had 6 months to live, only to live 20 years more. Because of medicines and procedures, because of the miracle of what doctors and science have been able to do. But that realization affected him in a way because he listened. My father was not a particularly open and expressive kind of man, but he began to laugh with abandon. He enjoyed every moment of life like it was a fine glass of wine. He loved fully. We didn't see each other more than 2 or 3 times a year because we lived 15 hours away from each other. But I remember a very non-expressive man becoming the kind of father who would never, ever see his son hello or goodbye without a kiss on the cheek. There was never, ever a phone call that didn't end with the words, "I love you, son." That's not a big deal, I know. But for a lot of men, that's not the norm. So I do believe that sometimes the things that we think might cripple us, the things we fear the most, can actually become new beginnings if we let them. We can learn and grow and move into them in ways that make us better people. But that's a choice only we can make. What God says to the people of Israel on that first Passover night, he says to us, this is a new beginning, a new day for God to act in our midst so that we can become a new people. But God didn't force the Israelites. The Bible doesn't say it, but I suppose they could have stayed exactly where they were if they'd really wanted. They thought about going back several times. No one had to force them to do what they did. They did it because they believed. And so we too can make a new beginning, a new way of looking at life and the world around us, a new way of prioritizing and valuing things and people, if only we allow ourselves to. But it's a choice that we have to make. There's a hymn. It's not really a Lenten hymn, but its words are so poignant for tonight that I want to read it. This is a day of new beginnings. Time to remember and move on. Time to believe what love is bringing, laying to rest the pain that's gone. For by the life and death of Jesus, God's mighty Spirit, now as then, can make for us a world of difference as faith and hope are born again. Then let us, with the Spirit's daring, step from the past and leave behind our disappointment, guilt, and grieving, seeking new paths and sure to find. Christ is alive and goes before us to show and share what love can do. This is the day of new beginnings. Our God is making all things new. And so in faith we'll gather round the table to taste, to share what love can do. This is a day of new beginnings. Our God is making all things new. Tonight, as we remember and celebrate the night Jesus first initiated the Eucharist and the Seder with his friends, the night in which he gave us the gift of his own presence through bread and through cup, it's easy to see the end is in sight. But if we have eyes to see, eyes that truly are transformed by the presence of his Spirit in the stories and in the meal, we can also see that this is indeed God's new beginning. We can be transformed in the midst of this moment, if we want to be. Amen.